My dear friends, have you ever wondered why some of the most profound souls you know are the ones who have walked through the darkest valleys? Why is it that the people who seem to carry a sparkle of deep wisdom, an aching sensitivity to life, are often those who have wrestled with addiction, with chaos, with pain so immense it feels like a private apocalypse? Perhaps it seems strange. Shouldn't the spiritually awakened be strong, serene, balanced, models of clarity? Shouldn't the universe favor them with peace rather than storm? Yet here lies one of life's greatest paradoxes. God often whispers to the broken, but sometimes he shouts through addiction. We've been taught to see addiction as a failure, a moral collapse, a weakness, a flaw in character. But what if addiction is not a defect, but a direction? What if it is not punishment, but a profound invitation to meet oneself? We must begin here with this provocative image: a person standing at the edge of the world, holding a bottle, a pill, a needle, or a glowing screen, holding, really, anything that soothes their aching soul, and in that moment they are not running away from life. They are trying in some imperfect way to return home, to silence the mind, to find some sense of peace in a world that feels unbearably loud. You see, all addiction, whether it's to substances, success, approval, or even spiritual ideas, is not fundamentally about pleasure. It is about silence, about stop, about relief. It is an attempt to enter what every mystic has sought, the death of the ego and the dissolution of the self. But instead of meditation, it is medication. Instead of letting go, it becomes a grasping. The addict seeks what the mystic seeks, but does not yet know where to look. They are not wrong for longing. They are simply listening to the wrong voice inside the same temple. Let me tell you a story. Imagine a bird raised inside a golden cage. It is given fine seeds, polished water, and every comfort. Yet it hears, in the distance, a song of wild wind and open sky. A longing grows. A vibration, something inside stretches beyond the bars. Then, one day, the cage is shaken. Violently, painfully, it feels like loss, like chaos, like everything familiar is falling apart. But in truth, the shake is what makes the door open. Addiction is often that shaking, that deep, uncontrollable trembling of the soul that says, "This cannot be all there is. I must break free from this body, from this mind, from this endless prison of thinking." Some people meditate for decades to dissolve themselves. Others drink themselves into oblivion in a desperate attempt to lose the burden of self. The difference is not in intention, but in awareness. One path is conscious, the other unconscious, but they are not so far apart. Now, this is not to romanticize addiction. Addiction destroys. It burns through the body, the mind, and every relationship it touches. It is a fire that consumes everything in its path, and yet, if heaven is to pour itself into you, something must be burned away. Do you realize that every great story of spiritual transformation begins with a collapse? Moses fled into the desert. Jonah was swallowed by the whale. Jesus wandered into the wilderness. Buddha left the palace and sat under a tree until all illusion collapsed. To fall apart is not a deviation from the path. It is the path. To awaken spiritually is not to become better. It is to see through the illusion of better altogether, and many who fall into addiction, who break, who tremble, who find their own mind unbearable, are not failing to wake up. They are waking up too fast, too intensely. Their sensitivity is high voltage, and they don't yet have the spiritual grounding to handle that current, so they reach for something, anything, that might soothe the existential anxiety of being alive. But here is what they don't yet realize. What they reach for is not what they truly want. What they want is silence. What they want is union. They want exactly what God has been whispering to them all along. And this is where the magic begins. Addiction cracks the shell of the ego. Have you ever seen someone in the throes of addiction talk honestly about themselves? There is no more pretense, no masks, no polite conversation. They speak with a rawness, a terrible, beautiful vulnerability that most people will never touch in their carefully curated lives. They know suffering, they know shame, they know the devastating intimacy of losing everything, and in that very loss they meet the one thing that cannot be taken away. In the deep, shattering silence after the high collapses, God whispers, "You thought you needed escape, but what you really craved was freedom." The addict's journey is a spiral. Step back from shame and moral judgment, and you will see what is truly happening. They are being unraveled. They are being undone. The universe is stripping them of every false identity, every illusion of control, every arrogance, every mental fortress they've built. Until finally the cry becomes not "I want more," but "I surrender." And in this surrender the spiritual awakening begins, not through enlightenment, but through collapse, not through brighter thoughts, but through the death of thinking, not through spiritual effort, but through divine exhaustion. You see, many people meditate and pray, hoping to silence their mind enough to hear God, but the addict experiences that silence involuntarily. Call it rock bottom, call it ego death, call it despair. Whatever its name, that moment is a spiritual threshold, and those who cross with awareness begin to realize something astonishing. Their addiction was never a curse. It was a calling, a desperate, unconscious attempt to lose their false self and find the truth. But now they can let go of the addiction and pursue what lies behind it, not the drink, not the needle, not the endless craving of the body or mind, but the vast inward space where surrender becomes prayer, where longing becomes devotion, where chaos gives way to consciousness, where the soul realizes, "I was never broken. I was being broken open." And so the addict, if they listen closely, begins to understand something miraculous. What they chased with substances was not destruction, but transcendence, not oblivion, but liberation. They chased the feeling of being nobody. Nothing, free for just a moment, the first sip, the first inhale, the first moment of release. They enter a kind of nirvana. The mind quiets, the worrying stops, the endless chatter is suspended, time dissolves. The relentless I evaporates. Isn't that what every mystic seeks? Isn't that what meditation, prayer, and all the spiritual disciplines aim for? A pause, a breath, a doorway into a reality where the ego loosens its grip and we experience, if only for a fleeting second, not separation, but union. So we must ask, why does someone seek God at the bottom of a bottle? Because they've tasted something there. Not God, but the absence of self. Not enlightenment, but the echo of it. And so God whispers, not with sermons or visions, but through the unbearable longing beneath the addiction. Through that hollow ache inside one's chest that no amount of pleasure, no fantasy, no intoxication ever truly fills. That empty space is not a wound, it is a door. Addiction, my friends, is not the disease. It is the symptom. The disease is separation from ourselves, from each other, from life, from the divine. The addict is not weak. They are sensitive. They feel too much, too deeply. They see too clearly the absurdity, the beauty, the unbearable mystery of being alive. And the world offers them painkillers instead of pathways. But here is the blessing, hidden inside the sorrow. Only those who have truly suffered understand that peace is not something you find in the world. It's something you stop resisting within yourself. The addict often reaches this realization not through success, but through surrender, not through achievement, but through utter collapse. Imagine a wave trying to separate itself from the ocean, stretching, stretching, insisting it is alone, until it finally breaks back into the sea and dissolves. It realizes in that final surrender that it was never separate. The breakdown is the breakthrough. This is why so many people report that their most profound spiritual experiences came after devastation. After illness, divorce, loss, regret, shame, addiction, failure, the ego does not let go gracefully. It must be stripped. It must fall. It must be brought to its knees. humbling so pure it becomes holy. Then in that silence God whispers, "Welcome home," and right here is where the real work begins. The addict is not saved by sheer willpower or punishment. They are not healed by denial or shame. They are saved when they understand that what they truly crave is God, not as a concept, not as a belief, but as direct experience, to be fully alive, fully present, fully open. The recovery of the spiritually awakening addict is not a return to normal life. It is a transformation of it. They learn, slowly, tremblingly, to sit with their own nervous system without escape, to feel their loneliness without numbing it, to endure their longing without filling it with noise. They sit and listen and tremble, until the tremble becomes a kind of prayer. This is what most spiritual seekers never understand. The gateway to consciousness is not a perfect life. It is a broken one. Some people spend years meditating to develop compassion. The addict learns it through being shattered, through apologizing, through seeing the damage they've done. They learn humility as a matter of survival. Forgiveness becomes the only way they can walk forward. They develop empathy because they have suffered deeply. Do you know how many people are asleep behind their perfectly polished lives? How many souls are dying quietly in the comfort of material success? But the addict, the one who has fallen and risen and fallen again, carries a strange and tender wisdom. They cannot judge, they cannot pretend. They know the fragility of the human heart. They know what it's like to reach the end of themselves. In a strange way, the addict becomes a priest, not by choice, but by experience, not ordained by church, but by suffering. They learn to see God not as an abstraction, but as the unshakable presence still shining in the darkest night of their lives. They learn to pray without words, simply by breathing. They learn that every craving is really a calling to go inward, to sit in silence, to surrender, and perhaps most beautiful of all, the addict becomes a mirror. When they speak, truly speak, it is not with spiritual arrogance, but with raw soul. They say, "I have been to hell, and it taught me that heaven was always inside." Do you understand the magnitude of this? The very thing they thought would destroy them, the very experience they resisted, ran from, hated, becomes the fire that burns away illusion. It is said in every spiritual tradition, you cannot awaken by running from your demons. They must be faced, embraced, and finally dissolved in light. Addiction is a demon disguised as a doorway, and those who pass through it, who make it all the way into the other side, become something rare, awake. Not spiritually pure, not perfect, but awake. They know now that pain itself was the hidden teacher all along, that every craving was simply a confused prayer, "Let me return to myself." And once this is seen, truly seen, the addict no longer needs to escape life. They can enter it fully with reverence. Their spirituality is not found in correct belief, but in honest being. They have learned, through heartbreak and collapse, that God does not speak through religion alone. He speaks through longing, he speaks through suffering, he speaks through the very places we were most ashamed of, because God, my friends, lives precisely where we refuse to look. And if you can hear this, truly hear this, something remarkable may happen within you. You may begin to recognize that the journey of the addict is not a detour from the spiritual path, it is the path walked unconsciously. You may begin to see that the exile from yourself is also the invitation home. That the brokenness was not an error, it was an initiation. Let me put it plainly, God speaks to spiritually awakening people through addiction because they will listen, not at first. No, they will fight, deny, bargain, numb, escape. Of course they will. The ego doesn't surrender without a war. But when the war is lost, when there is nothing left to control, no identity left to defend, then finally they are quiet enough to hear the whisper, "You are not being punished, you are being stripped, you are not dying, you are being reborn." Addiction brings a person to their knees, not as a curse, but as the only posture from which a breakthrough is possible. And here's the interesting thing. Many who overcome addiction, who awaken spiritually afterward, begin to share a curious trait. They do not fear suffering anymore. Not because they want it or seek it, but because they have seen what lies on the other side. They have been burned by their own fire. They have faced the dragon of compulsion and discovered, hidden under its scales, the forgotten truth of their own soul. And that changes everything, because you see, most people fear their emotions. They fear silence. They fear death. They fear what they might learn if they sat alone with themselves. But the addict has already met the darkness. They have already lived their own funeral. They have looked into the mirror and seen not just their face, but the shadow behind it, and what once terrified them now becomes an ally. What once enslaved them now becomes a guide. Their cravings transform into awareness. Their triggers become teachers. Imagine that. Imagine the bottle that once destroyed you becoming a symbol of your transformation, not as something to be glorified, but as something to be understood. You see, in the West, we are trained to overcome addiction as if it's a battle, a war to be won, a demon to be conquered, but in spiritual reality, it is a relationship to be healed. You do not defeat the craving by fighting it. You dissolve it by understanding it, by asking, what is this pain trying to show me? What is this emptiness pointing toward? For every craving is a compass, an arrow pointing not to the world, but to the wound beneath the world. And when the addict finally learns to go inward instead of outward, to sit instead of run, something ancient stirs within them. The knowledge that what they sought was never outside, not in sensation, not in intoxication. It was always within. This is why so many spiritually awakened people speak with reverence about their addiction, not because it made them happy, but because it made them whole. Only someone who has died to their old self can truly live. An addiction is often a slow, painful death of an identity that was never real. A death of illusions, of lies, of coping mechanisms, of borrowed lives. And when all of that is stripped away, something remains which cannot be destroyed. That is the soul. Now I must tell you something, and it may be difficult to hear. Most people live in addiction. They are addicted to certainty, to their own thoughts, to their self-image, to their dramas, to their fears, to the identities they cling to with white knuckles. But because those addictions are socially acceptable, because you cannot smell them or see them in the blood, they go unnoticed. But they do far more damage to the soul than any substance ever could. The alcoholic may lose their health. The spiritually asleep may lose their life, without even realizing it. This is why so many mystics speak of dying before you die, because if you do not let go of who you think you are, you will never meet who you truly are. The addict's suffering, then, becomes a strange kind of blessing. It forces them to confront, and eventually abandon, the false self. They learn the hard way what others never learn, that control is impossible. That separation is an illusion, that the only real freedom is surrender. What a strange and beautiful thing that is, to be freed through what once enslaved you. The addict eventually discovers this secret. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is presence. That's it. Not control, not perfection, not purity. Presence, a willingness to be here, now, without running, without numbing, without looking away. Presence is the very essence of God. That is why the mystic sits in silence, and the addict tries to drink the silence into their veins. But when the silence is finally allowed to arrive, something else arrives with it: compassion, forgiveness, understanding, not just for oneself, but for everyone. The addict becomes a sort of lighthouse, not because they are superior, but because they know what it means to drown, and so they shine, not to impress, but to guide. They do not preach, they do not claim enlightenment. They simply live with a gentleness that whispers, "I see your pain, I've been there, you're not broken, you're becoming."